Let's bring back our panel. We have Antoine Seawright and Caitlin Huey-Burns, along with Leslie Sanchez and Michael Graham. We're going to continue to keep our eye on that picture, though. But let me start with you, Caitlin. What do you think the president's approach is going to be here? You know, appearing before a House where the majority is now in Democratic hands, it's a very different feeling when you're navigating those halls, knowing it's a different group that you're facing.
It's a different group and going to be represented by that picture that we're going to see of Nancy Pelosi, a sea of white, and also behind him, Nancy Pelosi with Mike Pence. That's just going to be dramatically different from the past 2 years. Two things that I'm kind of looking at tonight when we're thinking about where the president's concerned. First, I think we do have to look at this as his kind of opening pitch for his re-election campaign, because he's talking about the State of the Union, but the State of the Union is directly related to him. And so he's going to want to talk about accomplishments, talk about his vision, and how he sees the country, especially as several of his already Democratic challengers are going to be sitting in that very audience. And the second thing is, you know, we're just coming off a month-long government shutdown, about to head into potentially another possible partial government shutdown. The president very much trying to make up ground here, politically and from a public relations standpoint. He knows the damage that this shutdown inflicted upon him. He knows that he has to see that he's gotten the blame, at least as public polling is concerned. So I think this will be a way to make up some ground, or trying to make up some ground.
Michael, what do you think the expectations are from the president's base regarding his tone tonight? I mean, do they very much want him to go after Democrats in this kind of setting?
They don't like anybody in that room except him. They don't like the Democrats at all. They think that the wearing the white is like basically like an insult. They're trying to smear President Trump, and they ask, how can you be attacking Trump? Look at what's happening in Virginia, where you've got guys accused of sexual assault, and the Democrats don't even want to talk about it. And they don't like Congress Republicans. They don't like any of them. They like Trump. And this is one thing I think we underestimate, is how much that unpopularity of Washington in general. Trump is, whatever he is, he's not Washington. He's something else. He could be something crazy or not competent, but he's something else, and that's one of the things that keeps his team with him.
Well, Antoine, if you're Nancy Pelosi, though, what are you thinking? It's been fascinating as we look at our first shots here, live shots at the chamber. You know, as the president makes his State of the Union address, knowing that you are presiding over this chamber where Democrats now have majority control in the House.
I think you're going to see leadership. I think you're going to see respect for the office of presidency. But I think you're going to see the speaker sit and chill tonight. Because guess what? The negotiating power is in her hands. She knows what the American people wants. She knows the makeup of the Senate. She knows that her caucus and Schumer's caucus are united. And she knows sitting in that audience are faces with issues that the president has to look them in the face and talk about the things that really matter to those people and impact them in a real way. She also knows that leopards do not change their spots and zebras will never change their stripes. So whatever comes out of the president's mouth tonight will be nothing to what he does when she's in a room with Schumer and herself trying to negotiate how do we keep our government open, but how do we pass what 70% of the American people want, and that's comprehensive immigration reform. And she also knows re-election is right around the corner for her caucus and the 2020 Republicans in the Senate.
So as our eagle-eyed viewers could spot there, Vice President Mike Pence has now entered. We also saw their Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. We saw, I believe that was Senator Schumer for a brief period of time there. But Leslie, I want to turn to you. In terms of the relationship now with lawmakers, when you talk about the Trump administration and, for instance, these negotiations that are happening right now, sure. Ultimately, what kind of position are these lawmakers in as they try to craft something that the president will sign? It's been said that it's very difficult to know when you have, for instance, the vice president saying the president would go for something and only to find out that in actuality that was not necessarily the case.
The vice president's always the last one to find out on anything, unfortunately. You know, ever since he's gotten
Speaker
in
Nancy
that job,
Pelosi, by the way, yes.
Ever since he started that job, he's the last guy to know. You know, it's unfortunate. But
what kind of position is he in, though?
Not a strong one. I say that. But from the president's perspective, I think what we heard was exactly right. The and I talked to several pollsters who are really focused on some key battleground states, and I asked specifically about the president's, kind of low approval numbers. They didn't care. They're like, nobody talked about President Obama's numbers at this point. They were low at that point too. And the bigger argument was Gallup last month came out with the same kind of survey that looked at Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and they were in the 20s in terms of approval rating support. They do not have a lot of political capital. So what are they eyeing? They're eyeing what can they accomplish this legislative year? What can they take back to their districts, which is what everybody's really focused on. And the president still has that momentum of raising dollars and having some prowess on the state level and really with the Republican National Committee. So what are they going to want to talk about? The economy, for sure. The jobs numbers, for sure. And keep up and bolster up that consumer confidence, which, despite everything we say about the government shutdown, and it did have an economic effect and a personal one for many people, you still see those numbers are strong. And I think as long as that remains consistent, the president has the upper hand.
But Leslie, that's what we heard from Republicans during the midterms, and we found out that health care dominated the day, and that's why you saw Democrats going on the offense talking about what we were for. So keep talking about the economy all you want, but keep in mind the economy is doing well for some, but it's not as doing as well for others. And at the end of the day, independent thinkers are a key constituency going into the 2020 election, and the president has some issues there, particularly with the government shutdown and some of the things that he will unlikely be able to get done because we have a divided government.
But I don't think those independent voters are going to go back and say, wow, 2 years ago he shut the government down, because they're going to say, wow, 10 years ago, I mean, for the last 10 years, how many government shutdowns have we had? They're going to come back to, is their economy strong? Can they pay their bills when they're, at their kitchen table? Has health care improved in any way, and they're doing something with premiums, because they promised you'd keep your doctor.
Here's the president, by the way, entering. Let's see if he stops to say anything to the cameras before he gets in. It doesn't look like he is. All right, so there he is. Sorry to interrupt, Leslie. They were telling me, let's wait for a minute.
He's the first president ever where it's possible. They
So
can
wait
stop
for the
right there
president.
and start talking.
Waving at us.
He did wave. He did wave to the cameras. But so Leslie, I mean, you were talking about this. The notion, though, I wonder about as he gets ready to make his way down Pennsylvania Avenue, is with his base, Michael. Is there room for him to even give the appearance of making a deal with Democrats on the issue of immigration? Or has the way in which he's framed things so far, $5.7 billion for a wall, and yes, he's tried to modify the language, however, that was not the chant at the rallies. The chant at the rallies was build that wall.
That's right.
Right, and Mexico will pay for it.
Based on
Chuck
what I've
Schumer,
seen,
by the way, Senator
based
Chuck
on what
Schumer.
I've seen, including the raw increase in support among Republicans for Trump over the past 6 weeks, which is just amazing. You think that's the reason why his numbers are down is because independents have collapsed. In some states, he's down in the teens, but the Republicans are sticking with him. He's their guy. They're going with him. They don't care. The math that I keep trying to remind my Republican friends of is they're almost at the point now where 50% of Americans said they will not vote for Trump. Period. How do you get past that?
Senator Warren, by the way, and if you are just joining us, there's a story that's broken in the Washington Post, that she was interviewed about. The Washington Post apparently using an open records request obtained Warren's registration card for the State Bar of Texas, providing a previously undisclosed example from Warren identifying as an American Indian. I'm reading directly from this article here by Annie Linsky and Amy Gardner. How problematic, Antoine, is this for her? Because remember, she's apologized for this notion of calling herself Native American, but now this raises the prospect there could be other documents out there that have yet to surface.
Well, I think it could be very problematic when you have a very intense primary with candidates who are all qualified, who are for the most part singing from the same hymn note. That could be problematic. It could be a separation factor for her when you look at Senator Kamala Harris's relationships with the same community or similar communities that Senator Warren talked about that she was a part of. The other thing is, I think what Democratic primary voters want, particularly in the African American community, let me speak to that for a second. They want honesty and transparency. This doesn't give off the honesty and transparency bug, so it could be very problematic. And that is a constituency she has to win. She absolutely has has to win in order to continue her engine going down the political road to the White House.
There's no wiggle room there, nothing.
Absolutely not. And then when you have Kamala, who's an African-American female, who says, you know what, you can't trust her, but you can definitely trust me, that's problematic.
And you've been hearing Warren weave that into her speeches on the campaign trail, the African-American vote, talking about affordable housing as a way, kind of a through line to speak to that community. And it also, I mean, you bring up a really good point, which is that this is a really crowded field. Democrats have options. It's not like they have to stick with one candidate. So any liability can become magnified when you have other options.
By the way, my producers are telling me that, in fact, as she was walking in, reporters asked her about this story, and her comment was, "Good to see you." So she declined to comment. You want to say something,
Well, just very quickly, I'm looking at the document. They posted it. And do you agree with me, Caitlin, that there's something, when you see something, you see her handwriting, American Indian, this person in 1986. Just very quickly, my grandfather is from Tulsa, near where she's from. His grandmother was a Native American, Cherokee Indian in the Indian Nation. I'm more Native American than her. Never in my life, ever. When someone asks me my race, and that's the word next to it is race, would I even think of putting American Indian? That's just not true. When you see it, it's hard to navigate around, I think.
Well, and I think it also puts more on her. So she's tried to talk about this story as something that Republicans brought into the conversation when she was running for senator in Massachusetts, which is true. They did bring that up, and the president now obviously has seized on that. But the question has always been, what was her role in advancing that? And we have already heard, you know, concern from some voters that by doing this DNA test, it kind of furthered this storyline instead of bringing it back. And it gave, as one voter in Iowa put it, fodder for Donald Trump to go after her. So how she handles this, I think, is really important. I will note, though, that after the DNA test, she did have a pretty good rollout of her campaign. I followed her in Iowa on several stops, and she was very well received. She has a real fan base. I mean, people have been following her career for a while, so we'll see if that can negate some of this.
So as we are continuing to keep our eye on this image here, I just want, Antoine, if you could, just explain to our viewers, why is it that we're seeing many of these female lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers, wearing white?
Well, there are many reasons individually why the women in the Congress have said they're wearing white, but I see it as a sign of unity. Led by Speaker Pelosi, I see it as a sign of unity that her caucus is strong behind her, particularly a large segment of her caucus, and that's women. And I think it speaks to a continued theme. When you see tonight, you'll see Stacey Abrams, a female, who will be leading the charge in the rebuttal. And so that's a continued theme that Antoine took from this. And talking to a lot of members within the Democratic caucus, they all said, you know what, we're going to stick behind our women, because that is a consistent voting bloc that has shown up time and time again for Democrats. And we had a record number come across the finish line first in the midterms.
And notice that there is no Freedom Caucus for the Democrats. In other words, there is no organized resistance to their own party's leadership. That's Nancy Pelosi has a unity that Paul Ryan could only have dreamed about.
That speaks to her power, and I mean, Caitlin, you know, the level of control that she's been able to exert. You know, it's been described as what, herding cats, I think, sometimes, trying to keep your caucus in line.
Right, and that was her pitch this whole time. Remember in the midterms when Republicans were trying to saddle Democrats with kind of using Nancy Pelosi as an albatross, or trying to hang it around Democratic candidates' necks, it didn't work. Democrats gained 40 seats and now have control of the House, and so this has always been her pitch, which is, you may not love me, you may think that the party needs to focus on kind of a younger generation coming up, but I can surely secure votes, and that has been her calling card. She's a prolific fundraiser, and she can get votes, and she proved that during this latest shutdown.
So Senator Bernie Sanders was there a moment ago. Antoine, I know you were talking about this earlier. He's actually going to be giving his own response. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, he's done this several years in the past, but this year is different, because for the first time in the history of, I think, of these State of Unions happening, we have an African-American female giving a response. And not just any female. I think we have the future of the party giving a response. A Yale graduate, former leader in the House of Representatives in Georgia, someone who's been on the front line for quality of life issues that matter, voting rights. If you see excerpts from her speech, it's a unified message that not only Democrats want to talk about, but I think the direction of the country. And the one thing Stacey was consistent about in her campaign, because I was involved, was a message of bringing in independent thinkers.